There is a moment almost everyone has lived through. Someone talks down to you. Someone ignores you on purpose. Someone treats you like your time, your effort, or your word matters less than theirs. Maybe it happened in a meeting where your idea got dismissed in 3 seconds and then repeated by someone else 10 minutes later, and suddenly everyone loved it. Maybe it happened with a friend who made a joke at your expense in front of people. You both know, and when you called it out, they told you to relax. It was just a joke. Maybe it happened with family, the one place where disrespect cuts the deepest because you did not expect to have to defend yourself there. And in that moment, something rises in you, a mix of anger, humiliation, and a question that keeps circling back afterward. Why did I let that happen? Why didn't I say something better in the moment? Why does it still sit in my chest, hours later, replaying on a loop, like my mind is trying to rewrite the scene until it comes out differently? Today I am not going to tell you to just ignore those people and move on like nothing happened. That advice sounds nice on a poster and does absolutely nothing in practice, because the sting does not disappear just because you decided to look away from it. Pretending it did not affect you is not the same as it not affecting you. What I want to give you instead are 7 real strategies tested for thousands of years by some of the most grounded thinkers humanity has ever produced, so that the next time someone tries to disrespect you, you walk out of that moment stronger, not smaller. Stay until the end, because the last one is the one that actually changes how people treat you. And most people never learn it. They spend their whole lives reacting to disrespect instead of building the one thing that makes disrespect lose its grip entirely. And once you see it, you cannot unsee how much of your energy has been going toward the wrong target this whole time. We tend to think respect is something we win through arguments, through proving points, through finally saying the perfect comeback 3 days too late in the shower. But the people who move through the world with real, lasting respect are not the ones with the sharpest comebacks. They are the ones who stopped needing the comeback at all. That shift starts with something simple, and it begins the moment someone disrespects you and you feel the urge to fire back immediately. The first reaction is almost never the best reaction. When someone disrespects you, your body goes into defense mode automatically. The same defense mode that kept your ancestors alive when something jumped out of the dark. Your heart rate climbs, your face heats up, your jaw tightens without you telling it to, and your mind starts generating impulsive responses that in 90% of cases only make things worse. Your body is not malfunctioning in that moment. It is running the exact program it was built to run. The problem is that biology was built for physical threats, not for a co-worker's passive-aggressive comment in a Tuesday morning meeting. There is a trick people who handle conflict well seem to use without ever talking about it. They expect friction before it shows up. Not because they are pessimists, but because expecting a difficult email, a short reply, a dismissive comment in a meeting means none of it catches them off guard. When you already know Monday will probably include someone being short with you, that Monday short comment does not detonate the way it does when you were expecting a smooth day and got blindsided instead. Picture the last time someone caught you off guard with a comment that cut deep. Notice how fast your mind wanted to fire something back, how the words were already forming before you had even decided to say anything. That speed is not strength, it is just adrenaline borrowing your mouth for a few seconds. It feels powerful in the moment and almost always looks different in hindsight, once the heat has left your body and you can see the exchange from the outside. The pause before you respond is not weakness. It is the difference between acting from your center or acting from impulse. Count to 3 before you speak. Take one more breath than your body is asking for. That small pause is where your real power lives, because in that pause you get to choose who you want to be in this exact moment, instead of letting the other person choose it for you. Every time you take that pause, you are practicing a muscle that gets stronger with use. And the people who seem unshakable in conflict are not naturally calm. They have simply practiced this pause thousands of times until it became automatic. Think of the person who says something cutting in a group chat, and instead of firing back within seconds, you see the message, feel the heat rise, and simply set the phone down for a minute. When you pick it back up, the reply that comes out is sharper in the sense of being clear, not sharper in the sense of being cruel, and it lands completely differently than whatever you would have typed in that first wave of adrenaline. The words are often the same words you would have used anyway, just without the 20% extra venom that the heat of the moment would have added. The 20% that turns a firm response into a regretted one. The same thing happens on the road. Someone cuts you off, and for 2 seconds your hand is halfway to the horn, and your whole body wants to react. Most people who avoid road rage are not calmer people by nature. They are people who have trained themselves to let those 2 seconds pass before deciding anything. By the time the 2 seconds are up, the urge is already smaller, and the decision that follows is a decision instead of a reflex. This is also why so many people say the thing they most regret within the first 30 seconds of a conflict. Not because they are bad communicators, but because 30 seconds is roughly how long it takes for the body's alarm system to fully override the part of the brain responsible for measured thought. Knowing that number changes how you treat the impulse. It is not a character defect showing up. It is a chemical wave that passes if you let it pass instead of acting from the crest of it. If this is landing for you so far, there's something worth knowing about that pause we just talked about. Most people can describe it perfectly and still lose it the second their hands are shaking. The power of not reacting was built around that exact gap, with the specific version of the pause for arguments for texts, for the moment right before you say something you cannot take back. It is linked in the pinned comment right now. But even once you have mastered that pause, there is still the question of what to do with everything your mind wants to make the moment mean about you. Because the next place people get stuck is in the story they tell themselves about why it happened at all. When someone disrespects you, your mind automatically starts searching for what you did wrong, what you said, how you acted, what you could have done differently. It is an old survival habit, trying to find the variable you can control so the situation feels less random and less frightening. And sometimes that search is useful. Sometimes you did contribute something worth examining. But most of the time, someone's rude behavior has nothing to do with you at all. It has to do with their own frustration, their own insecurity, their own way of relating to the world, a pattern they have probably been practicing their entire life, long before they ever met you. Epictetus put it plainly: if someone insults you, remember that it is their judgment that does the insulting, not your nature. In other words, someone's disrespect is information about who they are. It is not a verdict about who you are. The insult tells you something true, just not the thing it appears to be telling you. It tells you about their patience, their insecurity, their history, their standards for how people should be treated, none of which originated with you. This does not mean excusing anyone or staying passive about it. It means you stop carrying emotionally something that was never yours to carry in the first place. The next time someone treats you badly, ask yourself this: does this actually say something true about me? Or does it say more about the internal state of that person right now? Almost every single time the answer is the second one. Picture someone snapping at a stranger over something small, a delayed order, a missed turn, a slow reply at a counter. That reaction rarely has anything to do with the stranger standing in front of them. It has everything to do with whatever that person was already carrying before the interaction even started, the fight they had that morning, the deadline pressing on them, the sleep they did not get. The same logic applies to you. When someone is sharp with you, you are often just the nearest surface for something that was already building, long before you walked in. You happen to be standing where the pressure finally broke through. There is a version of this that plays out at work almost every week. A manager criticizes a report in a tone far harsher than the mistake deserves. The instinct is to assume you did something uniquely bad, that your work is somehow worse than you thought. But if you watch that same manager for a week, you often notice the same sharp tone appearing with other people over other small things, on days when their own pressure from above is highest. The tone was never really about the report. It was about the pressure that had nowhere else to go until it landed on the nearest available target, which happened to be you that particular afternoon. This does not mean every critique is unfounded, and it is worth being honest with yourself about the difference between feedback that stings because it is true and disrespect that stings because it is unfair. The first deserves reflection. The second deserves exactly the kind of release we are talking about here. The release of understanding that it was never really about you to begin with. Once you stop absorbing every sharp word as a verdict on your worth, the next question becomes practical. What do you actually do the moment someone crosses a line without turning it into a scene? Here is one of the most common mistakes people make, confusing setting a boundary with making a scene. People believe that for a boundary to be respected, it has to come with shouting, drama, a huge confrontation that everyone in the room remembers. It does not work that way. In fact, the calmer and more grounded a boundary is, the more respect it generates, and the harder it becomes for the other person to dismiss it as an overreaction. Saying this is not acceptable to me and I will not allow it, in a calm and level voice carries far more weight than screaming the same words, because calm communicates that you are fully in control of the situation and of yourself. Drama, on the other hand, gives the other person exactly what they were looking for. A reaction, fuel, something to point at later and say, look how they overreacted, look how emotional they got, as if that somehow cancels out the original disrespect. Responding from anger has a specific cost that people rarely notice in the moment. You stop being yourself and become a reactive version of yourself that the other person can manipulate easily, because now they are steering the interaction instead of you. They said one thing and got an explosion in return, and suddenly the conversation is about your explosion instead of about what they did to cause it. A boundary set with calm is unshakable. A boundary set with drama is just noise that can be dismissed. If you have ever watched someone stay perfectly level while setting a hard limit, maybe a parent, a mentor, someone who simply said no and did not raise their voice even once, you know exactly what I mean. There is something almost unsettling about that kind of calm, because it tells the other person there is nothing left to push against. No emotional lever to pull, no reaction to escalate, just a clear line that was stated once and does not need to be repeated. You see this play out with something as simple as a roommate who keeps leaving dishes in the sink. One version of you explodes about it after the 5th time, and the fight becomes about tone, not dishes. Another version says, once calmly, I need the dishes done the same day, and repeats that exact sentence every time it comes up, without raising the volume, without adding sarcasm. The second version gets results faster, almost every time, because there is nothing dramatic to push back against. Practicing this does not mean suppressing what you feel. It means choosing when and how that feeling gets expressed, instead of letting it hijack the moment for you. Even with a boundary calmly in place, though, there is another instinct that quietly undoes all of this progress, the urge to make the other person finally understand how much you actually deserve. This is one of the most exhausting traps people fall into. When someone does not respect you, there is a natural urge to want to prove it to them, to explain it, to convince them that you really do deserve that respect. You replay the argument in your head, you gather your evidence, you rehearse the perfect explanation that will finally make them understand. And this almost never works, because someone's lack of respect rarely comes from not knowing your worth. It comes from not wanting to acknowledge it, which is an entirely different problem, and one that no amount of explaining can solve. Trying to convince someone of your value is entering a game you cannot win, because that person's judgment depends entirely on them, not on you. You can present every piece of evidence, every argument, every ounce of logic in the world. You can list your accomplishments, your intentions, your track record, and if that person already decided not to see you with respect, no argument is going to change that decision, because the decision was never really about the argument to begin with. Marcus Aurelius summarized it this way: waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one. Your energy should not go toward convincing someone who refuses to look. It should go toward living in a way that speaks for itself in front of the people who actually matter, the people who are already paying attention, who already see what you bring, and who do not need you to perform a defense for them. If you have been feeling like you constantly have to defend your worth to people who are never going to see it anyway, that instinct to over-explain has a specific fix, and it is the part of the power of not reacting. Most people skip past on a first read. Right now, through the link in the pinned comment, subscribers get it at 37% off. It covers all 7 of these in more depth, including the last one coming up shortly, the one that quietly changes everything else once it is in place. Think about how much energy gets burned, trying to win over someone who has already made up their mind about you. Every text rewritten 3 times before sending, every explanation rehearsed in the shower, every imagined conversation where they finally understand and apologize. None of that changes their decision, because their decision was never about facts to begin with. It was about willingness, and willingness is not something you can argue someone into. You can hand someone every reason in the world to respect you, and if they are not willing to, they simply will not, no matter how well you present the case. You can see a small version of this on social media, when someone leaves a dismissive comment on something you worked hard on, and you find yourself typing out a paragraph explaining the effort, the process, the reasoning. 9 times out of 10, that person was never actually curious about the effort. They already decided what they thought before they typed their comment, and no paragraph from you was going to move that needle. The energy spent typing that reply could have gone toward the next thing you were making instead. The freedom in this way of thinking is quiet, but enormous. The moment you stop trying to win over someone unwilling to be won, you get all of that energy back for something that actually grows. Family tends to produce its own version of this. Someone has decided, for reasons that predate you entirely, to see you a certain way, maybe as the irresponsible one, or the dramatic one, or the one who never quite measures up. You could spend the next decade producing evidence against that label, every achievement presented like a small offering, every milestone shared in the hope that this will finally be the one that shifts their opinion. And you can watch it happen in real time, how each piece of evidence gets absorbed and somehow does not change the underlying verdict, because the verdict was never built from evidence in the first place. It was built from something else entirely, something that has very little to do with you and a great deal to do with them. There is a strange relief available. Once you stop expecting evidence to do a job it was never capable of doing, you can still show up, still be kind, still be exactly who you are, but you stop performing a defense case for an audience that already decided the verdict before the trial started. And once you stop needing them to understand, something else becomes possible too, something people usually get completely backwards, which is knowing exactly how to leave a conversation that has already run its course. When someone repeatedly disrespects you, there comes a point where the conversation stops being necessary. And here is where a lot of people make a mistake. They feel this pull to have the last word, to make it clear who won, to close things out with something sharp enough to even the score, something that will sting just as much as what was said to them. But there is a real cost to staying in a conversation past the point where it stopped teaching you anything. Every extra minute spent proving a point to someone who already decided not to hear it is a minute you are not spending on something that actually moves your life forward. Leaving a conversation before it resolves the way you wanted is not defeat. It is a decision that your time is worth more than a verdict you were never going to get anyway. There is a simple truth underneath all of this that most people never quite land on. It is never really the insult itself that harms you. It is the judgment you make about the insult, the decision to treat it as something worth carrying. When you stop needing the last word, you stop needing the validation of winning. And that, paradoxically, is winning in the most complete way possible, because you are no longer measuring your peace against whether the other person conceded. Notice how much lighter you feel after choosing to walk away versus after winning an argument you had to fight hard for. The walking away almost always feels cleaner because nothing about it depends on the other person's reaction. It is complete the moment you decide it, not the moment they concede anything. Winning an argument, on the other hand, often leaves a strange residue, because some part of you is still replaying it, still checking whether they really understood, still waiting for a reaction that validates the effort. There is a specific kind of strength in ending an exchange mid-conversation, simply saying, "I am done discussing this," and meaning it, without adding one more sentence to make sure you landed the last hit. This shows up constantly in group chats and email threads at work, where someone keeps pushing after a decision has already been made, trying to get one more dig in. The easiest, most powerful move is often the least satisfying one in the moment, which is simply not replying to the last message. No closing statement, no last correction, just letting the thread go quiet. It feels unfinished for about 10 minutes. Then it stops mattering entirely. Picture 2 versions of the same disagreement. In one, you leave the room and immediately start composing the perfect closing message in your head, the one that will finally make them see how wrong they were. In the other, you leave the room and your mind is already somewhere else, already back in your own life, because the conversation genuinely stopped mattering the moment you decided it had. The second version is not something you fake your way into. It comes from actually believing that your worth was never on the table to begin with, so there is nothing left to defend once you walk out. Someone still hunting for the perfect closing line hours after the conversation ended is still paying for that conversation. Someone who let it go the moment they walked out the door already spent that cost and moved on. Once you get comfortable walking away from the people who cost you your peace, a quieter question starts to matter even more, which is where all that reclaimed energy should actually go. Sometimes the solution is not in how you respond to the person who disrespects you. It is in making room in your life for the people who already treat you the way you deserve. When you spend too much time trying to earn the respect of someone who is not willing to give it, you stop investing that same energy into the relationships where respect already exists, where you do not have to fight for it, where it is simply present, quietly, without you having to ask. Seneca wrote something that applies perfectly here. Associate with those who will likely make you better. Welcome those whom you are likely to improve. This is not just advice about friendships. It is a reminder that your time and your emotional energy are finite resources, and every allocation of them is a choice even when it does not feel like one. Every minute you spend trying to change the perception of someone who does not want to change it is a minute you are not giving to someone who actually values what you bring, someone who already sees you clearly and does not require convincing. Sometimes the best way to deal with disrespect is not to resolve it. It is to leave it behind and build somewhere the ground is actually fertile, somewhere your effort compounds instead of evaporating into a person who was never going to notice it anyway. Think about the people in your life right now who never make you question your worth. The ones around whom you do not perform, you just exist, and it is enough. That is the feeling worth protecting and expanding, not the approval of someone who keeps making you audition for basic decency over and over, with no promotion ever coming. There is a quiet audit worth doing every so often. Not dramatic, not a purge, just an honest look at where your energy actually goes. Notice the friend who always makes time versus the one who only appears when they need something. Notice the family member whose voice relaxes your shoulders versus the one whose name on your phone screen makes your stomach tighten before you have even read the message. None of this requires confrontation or announcement. It simply means letting your attention and your time drift naturally toward the side of that ledger that is already giving back. Think about the last group chat you left, or almost left. Usually it is not one big blow-up that pushes people out. It is a slow accumulation, months of feeling slightly smaller every time you open it, until one day you realize you have not felt good after a single conversation there in a long time. Leaving that chat, or simply going quiet in it, is not dramatic. It is just redirecting your attention toward the people who already make you feel like yourself. And that brings us to the last piece, the one that actually holds all 6 of the others together, because none of this really works as a technique. It works as a way of being. There are people who never seem to negotiate for a seat at the table. Nobody hands them extra patience or extra warmth on purpose. It is just there, offered without being asked for, the moment they walk into a room. And it is not because they have more power, more money, or more status. It is because they carry something you can feel from a distance, a solid and quiet relationship with themselves that does not depend on the room's approval to exist. When someone has that relationship with themselves, they stop needing the world to confirm their worth. And curiously, that exact lack of need is what makes respect arrive naturally, almost as a side effect rather than a goal. People respect what they cannot easily manipulate, and what cannot be easily manipulated is someone who is already complete on the inside. Someone whose sense of self does not shift depending on who is in the room or what they said about you 5 minutes ago. Think of the calmest person you have ever met, the one who never seems to need the room's approval, who can sit through a silence without filling it, who can hear criticism without visibly flinching. That calm was not handed to them. It was built, conversation by conversation, disappointment by disappointment, morning by morning, of choosing to check in with themselves rather than with everyone else's opinion of them. You are watching the compound interest of thousands of small decisions to look inward instead of outward for the verdict on their own worth. Look within is the oldest version of this advice, and it still holds up because the fountain of good it points to never runs dry if you keep digging for it. No communication technique gets you there. What gets you there is building every single day a version of yourself so stable, so calm, and so secure in its own worth that other people's disrespect simply stops having anywhere to land. Not because you become immune to pain, but because you no longer need the approval of whoever is trying to take it from you. If you have been feeling like you constantly have to defend your worth to people who are never going to see it anyway, this is usually the missing piece, not another comeback line, not a sharper comment for next time, but an actual daily practice that builds that internal stability, so it stops being something you perform and starts being something you simply carry with you into every room, the one that quietly changes everything else once it is in place. Do not react immediately. Understand that someone's behavior speaks about them, not about you. Set boundaries calmly. Do not explain your worth to someone who does not want to see it. Know when a conversation has stopped being worth your time. Surround yourself with people who actually value you, and build a presence so solid that respect stops being something you ask for and becomes something you simply are. None of this will change your life overnight, but every time you practice it, you will notice something small at first, and then undeniable. The people who do not respect you start having less and less power over how you feel, and over time, that changes everything. Not because they changed, but because you did. As Epictetus said, seek only to not desire what is not in your power. Other people's respect was never fully in your power, and it never will be, no matter how convincing you are or how much you deserve it. But your peace, your dignity, and your response, those always were, and they still are right now in this exact moment. If you made it this far, thank you genuinely. It means something in here landed. The power of not reacting takes these 7 ideas further than a video ever could, mostly because a book can sit with you at 11 at night in a way a video you watched last week cannot. You will find the link in the pinned comment right now. Like this video if you are taking something away from it. Share it with someone who is dealing with a situation like this right now. Maybe someone you thought of while listening, and subscribe if you want more content on mindset, stoicism, and personal development every week. See you in the next one.